right. Well, thank you everyone for coming this morning, for dropping in on this. This has been a topic of recurring interest to me through my career as a teacher and as a student. Now, when I was a student, somewhere around the time I was a sophomore in high school, I think, I actually stumbled onto a copy of Kate Turabian's famous book on how to write a research paper. And while that was a college level book, I was already pretty much a college level reader, and I ripped right through that thing. And afterwards, man, research papers were my wheelhouse. I loved the whole thing that she had set up with, 3x5 cards for your bibliography, and then 5x8 cards for your notes, and set your notes up along tables and things like that. A few of you probably were taught that method as well at some point in your life. And that actually served me well through my first couple of grad school papers. I discovered after a while that maybe that wasn't serving me as well as it needed to in terms of originality, invention, and so on, that all my papers had a kind of a plug and chug feel to them because, hey, I had the method down. I could plug and I could chug, and I could turn out a research paper that was always going to get, an A. So I liked those. And of course, when I became an instructor, I assigned them regularly. I taught English composition to include an English composition class, the centerpiece of which was research writing, academic writing. And I really wasn't happy with a lot of the results that I got. And then as I learned more about the use of student writing in different classes, I taught medieval history, I taught literature, I taught philosophy, along with English composition. I started learning that, not all students have this kind of knack that I got, and the Turabian system isn't everybody's preferred toolkit for how to do papers. Here, I thought it was some kind of grand universal, solution to how to write a research paper. For a lot of people, it wasn't. So one of the things I started asking myself about seriously is, why do we assign these things at all? And so you look at my first bullet right there. A lot of the reasons that we assign research papers is it's out of tradition, or if we want to get into Newton's laws of motion, it's out of inertia. It's what we've been doing all the time. An object in motion tends to stay in motion at the same velocity and direction once it's starting that way. So, hey, we've always done research papers. We're always going to give research papers. That's a assumption that I hope we all challenge at some point. But there are sound reasons, of course, besides inertia, that we want to assign our students research papers. One of them is information literacy. And Lynee is going to go a little bit more into what the elements of that are. But basically, we want our students to be able to find high quality information and use it effectively, in a piece of writing, integrate it effectively into a piece of their writing, or into an oral presentation, or what you will. We also know that a lot of our students are going to transfer to a university. And when they go to university, they're going to have to write research papers. And so they have to get a foundation on how to write them here, because that's going to be the norm, if only out of inertia, in almost any subject that they major in at university. And then we would hope that that done well, a research assignment will spur a certain amount of independent learning on the part of the student, that a student will find some aspect of the subject that you're teaching, whether it's ancient history, whether it's nursing, whether it's library science, and would grab onto that and would use this as the opportunity to really learn more, about a myth. Someone needs to turn off a microphone. All right, so those are the reasons, but how good have the results been when we've gotten research papers back? We want to get these nicely organized and well-structured papers. We want to get these papers back, these essays back, where students have really processed their secondary sources and understand them well and use them in context and things like that. These are the kinds of things that we're aiming for. We also are looking for our students, to access the best available sources, to evaluate their sources. But unfortunately, what we get back, instead of an argument that reasons from well-processed, well-selected sources, is we get what's called a data dump. Students go to that minimum required number of sources that's in the assignment. They Google them mostly. It's often done at the last minute because we procrastinate on major projects because it seems so daunting and so on. And none of the things for a lot of students, or few of the things for a lot of students we have, that we want to see happen, that we want to see them learn because of this learning experience, don't happen. And a very good study on that was done by a consortium of university. I think they were all English departments, I think centered on the University of Kentucky. It's called the Citation Project. And I'm going to let Lynee take on now a next big chunk of this. She's going to tell you what we learned from the Citation Project and some things some directions that suggest that we might go to do better on our research assignments.
So thank you. The Citation Project is a collaborative project. It wasn't just a single university, but looked at about 24 colleges, from community college all the way up to Ivy League colleges. And they asked faculty to submit research papers. This was completely voluntary. So some faculty decided to be part of this project. They submitted, with the students' permission, their own the particular research papers assigned for that course. So this is already a very small and select sample. So about a dozen or 24 universities, a few select faculty from each college or universities agreed to participate, and their students also agreed to have their papers submitted. That being said, even once the Citation Project coordinators received those papers, about 50% of them were thrown out because the citations were not complete. So it's a very small sample. And I think it's probably a very good sample. The faculty, the students feeling that they have good products to submit for review, and the reviewers trying to find the best source projects that they could find. So let's get into Citation Project and some of their findings. First finding was that students will write from sentences. Most students will only use 1 or 2 sentences of a source, and they only use the first or second pages of the sources that they use. So these were papers from freshmen going into sophomore year, so second semester freshmen. They were working from only 1 or 2 sentences for each source for about 94% of the sources that they quoted. And in 70% of the citations that they analyzed, they only used page 1 or page 2 of the article or book chapter that they were looking at. 76% of the citations have the sources quoted only once or twice, and 52% of the papers use something called patch writing, and they actually come on to identify patch writing a little bit later. So writing from sentences, writing from sources. So most of the sources did not include a summary. So students write, actually that was back here, writing from sentences, students write from a single sentence. And they find usually like the zinger sentence to include. And very rarely have they been able to summarize the entire source, being an entire article or an entire chapter. So they are writing from one particular sentence, and when they are finding these particular sentences, they're not using more than 1 sentence per source, and they're not reading in depth. They're just using, in these papers, just the first or second paragraph of the article. Sometimes this makes me think, I don't think these are all literary criticisms. These might have been like controversial topic papers that they were using. And often the introductory paragraph, or if it's an article, an abstract, will often summarize the major findings of the article. So students know what an abstract is, and they enjoy using them because it saves them time in their own reading. When I'm looking at selecting sources, the critique of the citation project said that students did not make a balanced use, not a balance us, but a balanced use of their sources throughout their paper. Again, these are looking at 174 different papers, and they were not necessarily reading them in depth. They came up with a definition of what they were seeing, not plagiarism, but something called patch writing. So they define patch writing as the restating of a phrase, a clause, or one or more sentences while staying very close to the language or syntax of the source. So it's not theft in the way that we understand plagiarism as theft. Students might have actually quoted or at least cited with an in-text citation the patch written phrase, but the worry was that they were not developing in-depth understanding of the sources that they were engaging with. One of the major researchers for the citation project is local, another Morris County faculty member. Her name is Dr. Sandra Jameson, an English professor at Drew University, who on occasion coordinates the first year writing project for Drew. And in one of her pieces on her work on the citation project, she has this important quote. And she's worried about the type of assignments that she was giving, or Drew was giving, in the first year. And she said that the assignments, if they did not specify why anyone would do research or how research questions and conversations evolve, and if the information literacy portion emphasized just finding and assessing discrete sources, rather than developing a metacritical framework for thinking about how to do research, she said it's no surprise that the resulting papers tend to be information dumps, or what other people in the citation project talk about as information checklists, like one book, one journal article, one blog, one website. She would like to see students in freshman going into sophomore year start the academic conversation and the intellectual work that research should be starting. So at Drew, at CCM, at many colleges, we are trying to teach information literacy skills during the research project. And this is something at CCM that happens in English composition too. So in English composition too, it's a very important class. They cover a lot of materials, and one of the things that they are acquiring is writing, learning how to do research and learning how to write. The Association of College and Research Libraries came up with a list of standards in the 1990s. About 1999, they were put forth and adopted at CCM as well. And we were looking for the following skill sets. Students in this course, at least the library's portion of instruction, to determine what type of information they would need, access the information effectively and efficiently, which we hope that we teach them in the database and cataloging search, to evaluate information and the sources critically, and that is something that they do with English faculty, incorporate selected information into their knowledge base. Again, this happens in the final product, in the early drafts and the outlines and later final versions of their research paper, using that information effectively to finish that research paper, that critical research, critical literature criticism paper, and a little bit understanding the economic, legal, and social issues surrounding the use of information and using it ethically. And what we emphasize in the library visit is to make sure that sources are cited and that they collect all of the information to create a strong citation. So that was in the 90s and 2000s up to about 2015. And at that point, the Association for College and Research Libraries decided that they needed to update these standards. And instead of having standards with learning objectives that we've used, they came out with a very vague framework that students should be looking at for information literacy. And I will say right now, this has not been fully adopted. Not all 5 pieces of these have been fully adopted in what the library instruction program is trying to do, with the exception of maybe one of them. Scholarship is conversation, or maybe searching is strategic exploration, are things that we do. But they want students to understand that authority is constructed and contextual, that information creation is a process, that information has value, that research is a type of inquiry, that research moves forward by scholars having conversations with each other in the community and having discourse around new insights and discoveries. Another scholar at Drew University, Dr. Jody Caldwell, who just retired from the library. She was the head of the Reference and User Services and Information Instruction Literacy Instruction Program at Drew, worked with faculty to promote guidelines for developing a successful information literacy assignment. So she recommended that the skills and that the assignment promote, have material or assignments relevant to the course, that they encourage students to think about the type of information that they're using. Am I using an encyclopedia? Am I using current research from a scholarly journal? Do I need to have a monograph that gives me the complete history of a field up to a specific date? The library is always involved in the 3rd bullet, retrieving the information through catalogs, through indexes, through our online subscription databases, and sometimes talking about how to evaluate material found from a Google search engine. And the final product, looking at the information critically, evaluating it, comparing it, and synthesizing information. So that is Jody's guidelines for developing a good information literacy skill assignment. At CCM, the research paper is taught in English Composition 2, and our faculty do an enormous amount of work when they teach this course. The other faculty who work in the Writing Center are an important part of that piece because it's not just taught in one course. The library teaches a single session, maybe sometimes a follow-up session, but most of the work happens in the classroom on the student's own time, in later individual meetings with librarians, and also at the Writing Center when they arrive with the draft of their paper. So when I see other CCM assignments where English Composition 2 is not a prerequisite, and there is a very rigorous research paper assigned for 10, 20 page long research paper with the assumption that the students have completed this instruction. I think sometimes our students are very much intimidated. So the skills of research, evaluation, synthesis are not taught in high school, and I know this because I have an 11th grader. So these skills are not being taught in Morris County high schools. And that is why there is a lot of work that happens in English Composition 2. So I've had some conversations with faculty over the past 20 years where they think it's important for students to do research. They want students to know the journals in the field. They want students to think critically. They want their students to go beyond just a quick Google search or just gleaning some information with Wikipedia and ending their research. That is what our students, the skill set that our students come in here with, is to use Google, use Wikipedia, cut and paste and be done. So in discussion with many faculty over the years, and also in discussion with other librarians who have my job in different institutions, and specifically Jody Caldwell, who I had the pleasure of meeting in person several times. There's been several research assignments that have been given at CCM and at Drew and at other colleges and universities across the country, where we are starting to introduce some of these skills, information literacy skills, information literacy frameworks, like scholarship is a conversation, without having them put together this very large 10-page research Turabian style paper. So what I'm showing here are some alternate research assignments that we've seen at CCM. The very first one was something that an adjunct professor of biology, who later became a full-time professor at CCM, gave to her students in her concepts in biology class. And she would ask the students to read the New York Times on Tuesday, find an article that was listed in the New York Times about current research in the science section. And then through close reading, discovering the name of the researchers and perhaps a mention of the journal, to go and find the original research, and then compare and contrast those. So comparing the original research primary article in the science to the New York Times article, and then to start tracing it in other media. So maybe just through a Google search, maybe through something that appeared on a website like Huffington Post. How well did the reporters understand and report the original research that they found? What's the difference? Did the New York Times reporter understand the research compared to the other reporters, or did you really just need to look at that research yourself? Another biology professor had the students walk around campus and try and identify both native and invasive plant species. And we looked at a variety of books and databases that the US government put together to try and help identify both native and invasive species. We had an art teacher who had students design a pack of playing cards based on a particular culture's art traditions, and the students were able to do a lot of research in the art store database and throughout all of our print art book collection to find inspiration for those designs. A retired dance professor had a history of dance project that was just amazing. Students had to research folk dance, so they had to research the culture. They had to find recordings of the music. They had to find film of the dance being performed, and they had to find costumes. So that was a very large presentation that students put together for that class. And currently, a lovely professor that is now here at the college in the psychology department asks her students to select an empirical article on a psychology topic, a single one, and make sure that it's empirical research. And they discuss that and present that, I think, in her class. Additional research assignments I have here, looking at a Fortune 500 company's best possible strategy to enter a foreign market, using a lot of databases, news stories, looking closely at annual reports. Reviewing think tank literature on a particular policy question was something that was assigned by a political science professor. Right now in criminal justice, students are analyzing a very famous Supreme Court case that went through the court system all the way up to the Supreme Court. And looking at controversial newspaper articles, comparing and contrasting editorials from different regions of the country or different regions of the world was something that was assigned by a now retired political science professor. So quite a few different approaches. These aren't always research papers. The research is happening. It could be an oral presentation. It could be a PowerPoint. It could be a summary. It could be a briefing. With one history professor, it was a court, a prosecuting defense or a prosecuting case and a defense a defense of a criminal case. So really interesting information. Drew University has also collected. The first one is one that I've recommended multiple times, where faculty really want students to be able to do research and understand a variety of different types of published materials without having the paper. So this is an annotated bibliography. So that is one of our go-to recommendations for faculty who want students to dip their toe into research. And they have to annotate those. So they have to understand how that particular piece of information contributes to the student's understanding of a source. Jody had students who looked at the treatment of a topic over time. She had an assignment where students had to review the major journals in a field, noting who was published and what topics are of interest over a period of time. At NJIT, and this is also at Drew, but my friend Davida at NJIT had students critique Wikipedia articles, comparing and contrast Wikipedia articles, look up the references and citations, and then improve them, because not all Wikipedia articles have credible sources or up-to-date information. So her students actually had to improve the Wikipedia. And sometimes if it was a technical topic, they created it as well. And scholarly articles comparing and contrasting not just bibliographies, but works cited. Like, what are common sources that are always cited? What are the most important research papers in particular fields? So these are a few other colleges that Jody came across, comparing primary and secondary sources on a specific topic. And I have history professors here at CCM that do assign this to their students. Legislation traces, and New York Times. We don't have the historical New York Times, but we can still find some material for you. But this was a history topic as well, looking at keywords for how to look at different topics and using the keywords that would be the terminology and the vocabulary of the time to do the research in online newspaper databases. And tracking the classic papers through a citation index. How often does a particular paper get quoted? So a lot of great resources. And if you are interested in one particular assignment, you can reach out to me, and I would be happy to reach out to the professor and see if that professor is willing to talk to you and give details about how a particular assignment has been received by their students. And any questions or comments? And thank you, Maryanne, and thank you, Janet. I see you in the chat. When we see cats, we know that this is, we're moving on to Dr. Marlin's presentation. But before we do that, it's a good time to take a pause in case anybody had any questions, or you can either unmute yourself or come into chat. Cats now and forever. Yes, I agree.
I would just like to say that we could not do our jobs in Composition 2 if it were not for you and the other people who support us, because let me tell you, the students come away from those sessions so enriched. You all know more than many of us do about current areas, current research information. So it's a wonderful, wonderful support that all of you give us. And I would say too, you know, we don't just do a research paper because it's tradition. We do it, first of all, because the general education requirements for communication indicate that that's what students are supposed to do at some point.
Yeah.
Get information, evaluate it, and then present it. So we try to work within those guidelines. And I think, you know, every now and again, there's a real gem that emerges. So some of our students take this process quite seriously. And we monitor. That's the other thing. Evelyn is here. Maryanne is here. I see a few other people from the department. Students just don't give us a topic and then 6 weeks later turn in a paper. We monitor each of the steps. We make sure that they've developed a thesis, that they've developed a line, et cetera, et cetera. So we really try to see the paper emerge. And I think that's important for people who are not within the department.
Yes.
Yeah, Janet, I would agree with you entirely that, especially for students at this level, that kind of scaffolding is essential for any major research project, even less than major ones. And while we do it in English, I'm not sure it's been done consistently in other departments across the board. You know, some do it well. Some instructors within some departments do it well. Others maybe not so much. So that scaffolding is really going to be essential to student success. Help them to build the thing.
If I could make a comment, Dr. Marlin, earlier today, you spoke about how these could be disappointing, right? Maybe even painful would be a way to describe when we get some of the work back. And a lot of it is students aren't prepared. Others, it's a lack of motivation. And we do take those steps about beginning with your topic and outline and rough draft. And I found that when a rough draft is an option, very, very few take advantage. I will return them and they won't make changes before the final. So that can be a little discouraging. But a few years ago, I went to a national conference with community colleges, federal law enforcement agencies, and academies, local and federal agencies. And they said, hands down, the #1 problem they have is writing. So when I first saw the title of this, I was thinking alternatives meant they wouldn't be writing, and that really concerned me. So I can see if we take it from different approaches, they're still going to need to do research because they need to learn that, but their writing skills are so important to develop. I don't see where there can be an alternative to that.
Let me say a couple things about that, respond in a couple of ways. First, as far as most students' attitudes towards first drafts, well, in their heart of hearts, what they all really want is one and done. They want to write that paper, they want to turn it in and never have a thing to do with it again. So when I was, regularly teaching as college composition, as you heard this morning, I really worked hard to develop a culture of revision and help students understand that one and done just never works, that there's no such thing really as good writing. There's only rewriting, and I talked with them about how, Ernest Hemingway supposedly rewrote the last page of The Sun Also Rises something like 80 times before he sent it to his publisher. People asked him, well, why did you rewrite it that many times? His answer was, because it wasn't right. All right, so there's a very self-motivated writer who's got a very clear sense of his purpose. We'll talk to purpose here for a moment, but students really do need to learn the importance of rewriting, and that the only good writing really is rewriting. So I'm glad that you're scaffolding. I'm glad that you're trying to sensitize your students to that, and I wish you the best of luck. What I do want to say about alternatives to the research paper, what I'm thinking about in that title is kinds of writing assignments or presentations or group work. I mean, those can have research as well, that do not take the shape of Kate Turabian's sort of scholarly model, which really sort of comes from the notion that of the old German university, we're all scholars here. All of you are going to become scholars, so I'm going to teach you scholarship. Scholarly habits are good to learn. Information literacy is really important. The ability to organize prose, the ability to integrate sources into an argument and so on, all absolutely vital. But there are ways of getting students to do that, I think, that don't necessarily take the shape of a Turabian style paper. And actually, that's what I'm going to touch on right now. If I could go ahead. No, just keep it there. Go back. Going to talk about these two slides. Y'all knew they were my slides as soon as it came up, right? When I teach writing, one of the things I emphasize from the beginning is that whether a piece of writing is successful or not depends entirely on the purpose of that piece of writing and the audience. All right. So if I'm writing a grocery list for myself, I can misspell everything as long as I can read it, right? I'm the audience. The purpose is remember what I got to buy at the store. No problem. I don't have to worry about grammar. I don't have to worry about paragraph structure. It's just a darn list. All right, but it's different, if you're writing an email to a friend, and it's different if you're writing an academic work for an instructor. And one of the things students don't always understand that well is what the purpose of their college writing is. Write an essay, why? Write a research paper, why? The math folks here, if there are any, will be sympathetic to the whole when will I ever have to solve a quadratic equation in my life? There's sort of an equivalent mindset there. But students will have to write in a lot of situations, or they will have to present in a lot of situations. So I think if in your assignments, you incorporate purpose and audience, sometimes even fictively, students get a better idea of, oh, here's the information I need to select, here's how I need to arrange it, here's who I'm trying to reach, and here's who I'm trying to persuade. I'll give you an example of an engineering project that was regularly assigned in an engineering science course that we had at Hudson, and that is students were given a particular geographic area in Mexico, and we're told that right here we need a bridge. We need you to design that bridge, and then we also need you, however, to present to the local planning board why that bridge design that you've chosen is the correct one. And then you know who the planning board consisted of. It consisted of 2 or 3, engineering science instructors. And I used to like to come in on those presentations as well. So they had to research that part of Mexico. They had to research what the soil was like, for example. How wide was this thing that had to be gapped? What kind of materials was the road made out of on either side? What's the likely traffic in that area? What kind of weight would a structure have to stand given the commerce, in that region and so on. So there was research that was involved. And then from that research, they had to come up with a design. And then they had to present that design showing how this is how we're going to be meeting your needs. All right, it was a group presentation assignment and everyone had to do a part of the presentation, but that's a pretty good research assignment right there. There's a very specific audience, a local planning board you're trying to sell on a design. And there's a definite purpose there. You need a bridge, or I want to sell you a bridge. This can be done in a lot of ways, and not just in engineering. You can move to the next one, please, Lynee. So here's a sample that one of my faculty members, Allison Bach at Hudson, came up with for a group of students. And she actually had a number of these. And she compares here the kind of assignment she did for healthcare students who were in her research writing course with a more traditional way that an assignment would be given. So the old-fashioned way would be write a 5 to 7 page research paper about acne. Oh, fun. Cite at least 5 scholarly sources and follow APA format. Well, that's the way a lot of writing assignments, unfortunately, are handed out, because there's some belief that students understand what a research paper looks like, for example, and what its purpose is. And really, with a lot of students, what you're going to get back with on this is students who are just trying to check the boxes, right? So let me take a look at how this assignment was redone by Allison. And it says here, you are a dermatologist and your 16-year-old patient has just presented with an acute case of acne vulgaris. Write a 5 to 7 page letter to her parents explaining how you diagnosed the condition, what might have caused this condition, and your recommended course of treatment. Your patient's parents may wish to do additional research, so cite all of your sources using APA style. Include at least 5 academic sources in your letter. So you can see, as Eric is pointing out in the chat, you're asking your students to do some role playing. I actually incorporated role playing into a lot of my courses that I taught. I'll move on to those, but first, Craig's got a question, and let me address that.
Thanks, John. My question is kind of straightforward, and it's how do we know that the students know how to evaluate material as to its veracity and credibility? And maybe Janet can say something about this in terms of how she does this in her comp classes. Thanks.
Yeah, let me put that out to the librarians and English instructors here. I'd love to hear your feedback on that.
So I'll start, and then I'll defer to Janet. I'll talk about how we talk about veracity in non-English composition courses, particularly in science and medical courses. We talk about the peer review process. So I spend, particularly in psychology, quite a bit of time talking about what peer review is, what double-blind peer review is, what the editorial process is. So we talk a little bit about academia, that to become an expert in the field, how much education people have to go through, what their interests are, why anybody would want, would get the book published. Why are people getting books published instead of just writing screeds on blogs? So I don't know that students come into colleges now with an understanding of what the role of an editor is and what the role of a peer review panel is as well. So that's where we talk about it for our science and social science courses. So hopefully one of the English faculty will weigh in as well.
I'm going to give my colleagues an opportunity to speak before I say anything, because they've done composition too multiple times, semester after semester. Evelyn, maybe you want to jump in here.
I'm struggling a bit here, to be really honest, because I think these are interesting and creative ideas, but I know that years 3 and 4, they're going to need to write papers, and not just 5 to 7 page papers. They're going to need to write 10-page papers for their senior seminar courses. So doing that cold, more or less, and not understanding how to write a 3-page response paper, using the correct close reading and the correct citations for that, and then understanding how to layer in research, I think is problematic. I also, my kids at James Caldwell High School, my son he had in 8th grade, he had not a semester, a marking period where he produced in 8th grade a 5-page research paper on Lenin. That was his topic. So, I mean, I know we can't change the whole K through 12, but I'm just really struggling with not assigning this, and especially Comp 2, and maybe sort of giving over in our important courses that role of scholarliness. That's what makes us an excellent transfer institution. And I know our identity is shifting and morphing a bit, but if we want that piece of it to continue, I think one additional question, the examples that you gave, Lynee, maybe you can elucidate me on this. Were they from 1st and 2nd year courses at Drew? And if they were, then I think we're asking a different question. Does that make sense? Like, what
Yes.
are they doing in years 3 and 4?
Yes, and that is something that's true at Drew. So at the philosophy at Drew was that they will learn how to do all of this in their junior and senior year during their writing seminars after they finish the equivalent of English Composition 2. At CCM, again, we cannot require that somebody take an English Composition 2 before they take a history course or a psychology course, right? So we still want them maybe perhaps to be able to do some research in the field, with the understanding that perhaps they haven't been taught how to write and integrate in high school, which is why Comp 2 is a heavy, heavy lift. There's a lot that happens in your courses. So what, so when I talk about this with Jody, we understand, she's like, well, we can delay this in freshman or sophomore year with the understanding that they're going to get it next year in junior year. At CCM, we give an associate's degree, and that might be the terminal degree for some people, or some people might get the bachelor's, they return 10 years later, or they work full time and then take a single course per year as they receive their bachelor's degree. It's a different life plan for many of our students, although quite a few of them do go on and complete their bachelor's within 2 years. So I'm not, so when I'm looking at the alternative assignments that the faculty here have developed, and that some of them have adapted from what has happened at Drew, these are not English courses. They are other courses where they have polled their students and have realized that the majority of them are not yet in Comp 2. Comp 2 might be 1 year away from their current enrollment. So they're trying to balance out, how do I get my students to research in my field, their specific field, without giving them the research paper, which might overwhelm them since they haven't completed the Comp 2 coursework yet, if that answers. And I know Eric and Craig both had a comment. Eric, thanks for your chat. And I think Craig and Eric both had their hands up, so.
May I reply to Craig's question?
Thanks, Judy.
I do think that it's a very particular question that you have. First of all, one of the reasons we do a literary research paper in Composition 2 is that we're able to look at the source material that the students have and know whether or not it's quality. And another thing that we do is review the bibliography, as that's one of the reasons we do the paper in stages. And I mean, over the years, I've seen somebody quote a high school student that he got on the web. That's nonsense. You just throw it out and you say to them, don't do it again. I'll cut your heart out. And usually they're okay.
Let's not do that.
You're right. But the point is, you have to be able to look at the quality of information they're gathering. And the way you do that is to ensure that it's your area of expertise. That's one of the reasons we've always argued that doing a literary research paper is the way to ensure that students get the quality sources that we know they need in order to make critical inference and critical judgment. Does that help, Craig? Does that clarify?
It does, Janet, and thank you. My concern, of course, is because so much of the research that students are doing is off the internet. And I mean, early on in my classes, I tell the students, you have to ask yourself certain questions about the internet. One is, first of all, is it a .com or is it a .net? Is it a .org site that you're going to? And then is it being sponsored by a organization that has credibility? If you're not sure, you ask. Then you start looking at, basically, about what do they use for their resources and their source material. And so, there's all sorts of things that we try to do, especially if the students haven't had Comp 2 yet. But I wondered just, to what, sorry, I know this all touches on the whole thing about critical thinking, which is kind of at the core of what we all teach and all that. But I was curious as to how it was done in the English classes, and especially the comp classes. Thank you.
And we look very closely, as I say, at the preliminary bibliography.
Yeah.
We ensure that students have got, and that's where our library support is absolutely essential, because through that instruction, the students are also given the most respected areas in which they can do research, the most important databases.
So Maryanne, you have your hand up for a question?
Yeah, yes. I just wanted to add that Comp 2 is preceded by Composition 1. And this is where we expose the student to good writing, good essay writing. We have collections of essays, sophisticated essays that are excerpted from journals or magazines that are respectable. So I think by familiarizing them gradually with good writing, I have my students summarize what they've read. They write essays based on what they've read. So I think that in a way it is a process of learning. So by the time they get to Comp 2, their evaluative skills, I think, are honed a little bit more. I mean, they're not 100% certainly, because I agree with everything that Janet said about the bibliography and about our expertise in the field of literature. But I think that it is a process. And for some of them, it's the very beginning. For others, they're a little bit more sophisticated. But I think that Comp 1 definitely is important in the process. Thank you.
Thanks. So what I want to get back to then is that sense of purpose and audience. There's no question that we have to prepare our students to perform when they transfer to a university. That it can be expected, if they are majoring in one of the humanities, that they will need to be versed in how to do a scholarly research paper. That said, I still think you can inject purpose and audience into research writing. And in particular, if you're doing a traditional academic paper, it's important for students to understand these are the conventions of scholarly discourse. This is why we do this kind of research. It gets back to Lynee's slide about, the construction of knowledge, the construction of authority. Research as being a conversation with other smart people, to take things, to develop new knowledge. Not that a freshman or sophomore in college very often develops new knowledge. It's new for them, so it becomes new in a certain context. But you still have to keep in mind that we have a scholarly purpose, and this is what scholarly audiences expect. All right, there's a nature of the scholarly, the academic audience where they require certain things. They're evaluating your writing based on these criteria, which are not the same criteria that your friend uses in evaluating one of your cute texts or so on. So I just wanted to touch back on that, and then Maryam, you had your hand up as well.
Yes, I wanted to say I have noticed two issues. And one is that the professors teach a research paper as if the students are all going to get a PhD in that field. And a 5-paragraph essay is a model for a 5-chapter dissertation. And the students are writing to satisfy the professor. They don't see the link between what we're doing to their future courses or their future careers. So we should be teaching with a focus on the research mindset, thinking, analyzing, synthesizing sources, the composition process, evaluating ideas, having a cause, having a connection to identity. Like if we teach, for example, literature with a connection to the student's identity, they will find a cause, a reason, a passion to do more research on the topic, not just writing a literary research essay because this author is so wonderful and amazing and great, I went from literature background to education and teaching. So first, I was very biased on the importance and significance of the literary writer and the literary work. But when I went to education, my focus and attention changed from the text to the learner, how the students are learning. So we should get into the mind of the students instead of just getting into the mind of the literary writer. And see what happens in the mind of the learner. Look at the essay as a way of getting into the mind of the student, how they are thinking. Are they thinking, what thoughts are they producing? How are they shaping their ideas? And the literary work is still important because they are best samples of language. It's language flourished into the literary work. Let's look at it as we're developing our language at the same time that we are reading a literary work and we're writing. And language is going to be our tool for communication in any field. We need to create that connection for the students, to connect the literary work and literary research to their lives, lived experiences, to their future careers, to their future courses, to their majors, not
Great.
just with a bias on literature.
Okay, thanks, Maryam. Again, you're getting back to purpose and audience. Our purpose is to promote intellectual growth with all of our students. Our audience happens to be that group of students, and you've spoken to a number of ways there, how we want to make that happen. A number of mindsets that we need to take on if we're truly going to be student-centered in our teaching. Evelyn.
Yes, well, I agree so much with so much of what Maryam said, connecting with students. I think one of our main jobs, especially in Composition 2, is to get beyond the self-referential. Our students know how to do that. They are the in touch with their feelings generation. And how do you move them from that, which is important, and I don't want to minimize that, but how do you move that into a discourse that approaches professional? And the research paper in Comp 2 is one way to do that. So I understand. So Drew has sort of postponed that process until their junior year. But even this, you are a dermatologist and your 16-year-old patient, it's very self-referential. I think until I'm told otherwise from somewhere, that's part of my job. And that's what the research paper does. It moves them beyond that into a third-person conversation with other, as Dr. Marlin just said, smart people. So yeah, again, that's the mode on which I struggle. And I think literature, because it's stories and theoretically interesting on some level to our students, helping them to move beyond what they think and that personal response to an analytical response using literature is actually not a bad way to do it. I think it's easier than other methodologies. But again, I don't want to minimize the connection. We've got to have that there, but how do we move beyond?
Evelyn, you have just described the two great poles in English composition between which the pendulum has been swinging since before I started, and the struggle that you're having, trying to find where's the medium between those poles, or to which pole do I want the pendulum to go further in my classes. That's the struggle I had when I started out back in the 80s. That's the struggle that is still going on, and it has something to do with the nature of the animal we're wrestling with here. Anyway, what I'd like to do, because we're running a little short, let me just show you really quick a couple of other assignments that I've seen people use that have involved purpose and audience in different topics. So here's one that I think came out pretty well in a literature class. You're an editor for the series you know as SparkNotes. What student doesn't know SparkNotes, right? For the novel you just read, write a letter of at least 1,200 words to your editor-in-chief explaining what changes the next edition of SparkNote needs to be more helpful to students. There are variations on this to critique the SparkNotes, to find where the errors are, what critical approaches are they missing, what aspect of the novel are they missing, and so on. And it was a research assignment because 3 serious critics of the novel were required. And I think a bibliography was handed out on, major critics of the poet or novelist who was involved. So here's one that was done in the medieval history class. You're the abbess or abbot at the monastery of St. Augustine in France. It's 1120. One of your patrons, Count Henry, a warrior who survived the First Crusade, has just noticed this new group of monks in his lands who call themselves Cistercians. They seem a bit strange to him, like they wear white robes instead of black robes. What's with this? He's worried, so he's asking you to write to him 750 to 900 words, explain who these Cistercians are, give me an assessment as to whether or not I'm going to have trouble with them. And again, use a number of academic sources, cite them in a manner you find apt. So again, it's role playing. It's a bit more objective in this case because we're asking, do an assessment of this group of people. Who are they? Next one, Lynee. You went back. Yeah, so here's one you know what? I'm going to take away your mouse license. All right, so here's one that I did. It was kind of fun. It was in a first year writing class where we read Inferno. So the assignment was, you're a member of Mino's staff at the top of second circle of the Inferno. A particular historical character, and I gave them a list of potential people, most of whom they'd never heard of, is about to descend for judgment. Minos wants to know where she or he should be sent. Write a brief for Minos that recommends that person's placement based on your research of at least 3 academic sources, cited in MLA format. So I got to let students send people to hell. Some of them wanted to send their 4th grade teachers, I know, but that wasn't allowable. They have a lot of fun with this. Now, of course, we all know that in Inferno, when a new soul reaches Minos, they just confess everything, and Minos makes up his mind there. So this actually runs counter to what happens in Inferno, but still, it's kind of a fun thing to do. And then here's one that's been done in a philosophy class. You're the ethicist at a hospital. A famous Major League Baseball player who's a chronic alcoholic has presented with acute liver cirrhosis. So bad, it requires a liver transplant. Your transplant list is ordinarily first come, first served, but this patient has volunteered to donate enough money to the hospital to expand its pediatric cancer wing in a way that could save many lives if they'll give him the next liver that's a good match. The hospital president wants your advice. So citing at least 3 philosophers we've discussed in this unit, write a memo to the president with your recommendation and the argument behind it. Cite your sources, MLA. So, you know, there are some ways to inject purpose and audience so that a student understands why he or she is doing the research and for whom. Now, let's go back though to Evelyn's point, which I think is a really good one. We in the world of scholarship, we in the world of academia, we are one of those discourse communities. We do have purposes and audience in our writing. I think a lot of our academic writing, especially in English, in literary criticism, has become far more self-referential over the years, certainly since, you know, the 70s and so on, when I was first exposed to it. But it is still important that we acculturate our students into, you know, into that academic environment. But this is also, these other assignments are a way for these students to learn how to find sources, to learn how to process sources, to learn how to think, I've got a specific argument I have to make. How do I integrate those sources smoothly into that argument and present them? It's not just the data dump we get too often. We're actually over time, but that means we have time to take a few questions and put a few more things in the chat.
So one thing I'd like to just draw attention to is that Eric has given a couple of questions or comments in the chat that he does assign a lot of role playing. And he says one thing is to ask students whether or not they're being sold something. I just wanted to give Eric a chance to weigh in if he has a mic available with him.
Hi, yeah, I do.
Thank you.
So just to clarify, this is an idea that I've seen a lot of people they mention things like, well, this person said this and this person said that. And it goes along with a lot of what you were discussing in finding the veracity of publications and experts and things like that. And anyone on the internet can say they are an expert in X, Y, Z, but if they're also selling you their personal book on the same channel as the top link in their article, that usually to me throws up at least a yellow flag, maybe not a red flag. If the book is peer reviewed and a bunch of independent research and with the cooperation of NYU and all this other stuff, then great. But if it's a talking head telling you something that they believe and then also selling you a book, usually that perks my ears up a little bit. Whereas the opposite, what you were talking about is, if you have a medical professional, what is the importance of peer review process, and students or any lay person understanding the fact that oftentimes medical decisions are not made by one person, but instead by a team of dozens or hundreds of people who all confer and come to some conclusion. So that's what I meant. And I've seen a lot of clickbait articles, both in my field, game design, and also in, not surprisingly, in the last year, a lot of medical fields where the articles will definitely get you to click them so that their traffic goes up and they're pumped higher up in the search results. And that whole fun, you were talking about the circle of hell, Inferno stuff, the circle of SEO hell is fed by the public, I guess.
All right, thanks, Eric. So a few of us have someplace to be in 3 minutes, I'm afraid, but I'll be happy to keep the line open or the chat open for a couple more minutes for those who wish to hang around.
One thing I think it's important to do is to distinguish, at least at CCM, from the classes that are not English that assign papers. And that's always been my concern since I got here, because I know that the students perhaps weren't taught the way I was taught in high school. I know what happens in English composition 2 is an enormous lift, and that there's a lot of things that happen outside of the classroom in the writing center as well. So what I would like to just emphasize is that for those of you who are not familiar with what happens in English composition curriculum, or you don't have teenagers in the Morris County Public Schools right now, do a survey with your students before you assign these really large writing papers, unless you have that time in your own curriculum to do that kind of scaffolding. And I hope that you will consider looking at additional research assignments. And once students, if you have a classroom full of students who have completed composition 2, then they are very well prepared. And if you are lucky enough to have that, and sometimes you will, then I think you can get into those types of projects.
Yeah, please, Janet.
Scaffolding does one other thing. It cuts down plagiarism. If you monitor what a student does, it's a lot easier to accept a paper with some peace of mind, knowing that at least you've given it your all and that you've seen what the student has done progressively. A paper that drops like manna from heaven into my hands is never read because I have no idea of its provenance, okay? And I think that's something outside of my department faculty need to consider. It really is tough, but you have to at some point monitor what happens with a paper like that. We have students who are used to cutting and pasting. They can buy a paper. I mean, you determine what grade you want, and it depends on how much you pay for a paper. This is a real issue. So working with them progressively really does cut down on plagiarism.
I think from a writing across the discipline standpoint, Janet is absolutely correct. If you're going to assign your student a significant piece of writing in your class, you need to include scaffolding. You need to include intermediate steps where you check in with what the student's doing. But that's a challenge in some disciplines, because to do that means you're giving up time where you'd be doing other disciplinary things to work on the composition process. So you have to balance these things out, I realize. I'm a really big believer, as you might guess, coming from an English background, of learning through writing. I think students learn more in a class, and they learn more from the papers they write for class than sometimes they learn from any other aspect of the instruction, because it's in writing that paper that everything from that course starts coming together. They start coming to an understanding and comprehension of it. So I'm a big fan of writing to learn. I'm a big fan of making writing central to evaluation assessment in every discipline. But if you're going to do that, you have to make sure that you've built in the scaffolding, and that you've also sort of developed yourself a bit with at least some minimal elements of how one teaches writing.
Yeah, there is research on how students learn about a topic by writing poetry about it. That explains the need for poetry across the curriculum.
Yeah, that's going to be a harder sell than writing essays across the curriculum. Anybody else? Well, everyone, this was a lively session, interesting session. I hope we all, again, nothing that got put out here is doctrine or policy or here's how we have to do it. It's simply, we hope that we got some thinking going on. We hope we spurred some thinking and some reflection as to how we do our work, and that you take that forward into the semester. So I want to thank everyone for dropping in, and hey, I hope to see you on campus in a few weeks, if not before.
The library's open. Come visit.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.